Okay, hello everybody. Welcome again to today's webinar. My name is Greg. If this is the first one that you're watching, I've been an English teacher for the last 15 years. I've been back here in my hometown, Hamilton, New Zealand, for the last 2 years, a lot of that time working for Grade. So this is a public webinar, and I know a lot of you will be watching on the Grade Facebook page. At any stage during today's listening webinar, if you have any questions, please pop them through and someone at the other end will be able to flick me or send me through a message so we can be interactive. So as I just mentioned, and you probably saw if you tuned in earlier, we're going to be focusing on listening. To do that, we're going to use a practice test from the Grade site. Now, again, this is a practice test, but it is very similar to what you would encounter on test day. So whether you're preparing for the academic test or the general training test, it's the same test. And I'm going to take you through to the site now. So hopefully you can see what I'm looking at. Whoops, that's not what I want you to look at. Okay, hopefully you can see what I'm looking at now, which is the Grade site. Actually, that's not working. Let me try one more time. Okay, that looks like what I want to show you. So we are on the dashboard of the Grade page. So as you can see, we have writing, reading. As I mentioned, we're going to be doing listening today. So we go down to listening tests. And we're going to be doing part 3 today. So there are 4 different sections in the listening tests. The first section is a dialogue, which tends to be from general, anywhere from general daily sort of interactions, whether it be a job interview, making a booking, something like that. General English is also the focus for the second listening part or the second section, but that's a monologue. Now, with parts 3 and 4, they're almost always related to education. Part 3, which we're going to look at today, section 3, whatever you want to call it, that's also a dialogue. Today, we're going to listen to people preparing for a university assignment. Later on, if we do part 4, which we have in the past, you'll see that's a monologue. Usually that's a lecture. So to go through to the practice test, I click on begin. And just a reminder with the listening test, this is a distinction from the reading test. It says 40 minutes, but usually with all the 4 different sections, the running time of the tracks is anywhere between 25 to 30 minutes. So during that time, you'll frantically be writing down all of your answers on your question paper. After you have listened, you'll have an extra 10 minutes to transfer the answers that you've scribbled on your question paper to your answer paper. That is very different from the reading test. In the reading test, you have 60 minutes, but that includes filling out the answer paper. So I keep saying this because that is a confusion, but it's definitely one that you don't want to make. Right? So just remember, you have 10 minutes at the end of the listening test, but not for the reading test. So we're going to go through to section 3, as I just mentioned. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make some predictions. So we know from question 21 that one of the speakers' names is Hannah, and she's talking about a presentation for an assignment, which I just mentioned. Now, this is an easier question because we can expect to hear some day, perhaps, right? So I'm sure you're familiar with days of the week. So what I'm doing here is what you should always do as well. You're not going to get too much time on test day, but the more you can think about what you're going to hear, which we call predictions, the easier the test is going to be. You want your mind to be active during the test. You don't want to just sit there listening and then look at your question paper afterwards. You need to be thinking about what information you need. Second question we're going to predict now is how long was Terry's presentation? And we can even go as deep as thinking, well, there must be 2 focuses for this conversation. One is about what sounds like Hannah's upcoming presentation, and then Terry giving information about a presentation he's had in the past. We can see that with the use of was, and we're going to hear some minutes. So usually identifying numbers are easier for most students. Now, this type of question is not easy though. And we can see it's a negative. Which area has Hannah not covered in her presentation, right? So now we do get some insight or some hints about what her presentation is about. And it looks like something to do with the impact of climate change, maybe related to Australia. Now, all of these seem very possible, but one of them is not going to be in her presentation. So at this stage, what I'm going to do is I am going to open up the listening file for you. I just have to reopen that. I won't be a second. I accidentally closed the page there before. And I'm going to play through the file. And at the same time, I am going to answer it, and then I'm going to review everything for you. So it's a little bit different to how you would do it on test day. So you're going to watch me answer everything, and I will confirm all the answers, then I'll submit the answers at the end. Hopefully, I'm going to get 10 out of 10. So obviously there's only 10 questions in each section. 3.
You will hear a conversation between two university students about a presentation they have to give. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25.
Okay, so we just heard the announcer telling us that we have some time to look at questions, the first few questions. Now, I think we're only going to deal with questions 21 to 23 because we can see questions 24 tend to be a different question type. So that's usually how the questions are divided, by question type. On test day, you're probably likely to get a balance of the 10 questions, 5 and 5. But here it looks like the balance is going to be 3 and 7. So we have multiple choice. And then my guess is that the next 7 questions are going to be after we get a bit more time to read. Now, this reading time is not long. Usually it's 30 seconds, possibly a minute if you're lucky. That is your golden time where you need to make as many predictions as possible. We've already made our predictions, so I'm just going to let this run through, and then we're going to start listening.
As you listen to the first part of the talk, answer questions 21 to 25.
Hi, Terry. How's your Monday going?
Hi, Hannah. It's going well, thanks.
Okay, so the first thing we hear are the two speakers. Now, I'm assuming that most of you know that Hannah is a female name or girl's name, and Terry is usually a man's name, can be a female as well, but now that's confirmed for us. That's really important to always confirm the speakers, who they are. Usually you're going to get a male and a female. Sometimes you might get 2 males though, so it's really hard to distinguish who's speaking, whether it's a male, female, 2 males or 2 females.
How about yours?
I'm good. I have been working hard on my presentation. I have to do it the day after tomorrow.
Okay. Now, I'm going to repeat back at times to help you understand. Hannah just said this. I've been working hard on my presentation. I have to do it the day after tomorrow. Now, this is actually quite tricky because I'm actually going to rewind back for you. You may not have heard this.
As you listen to the first part of the talk, answer questions 21 to 25.
Hi, Terry. How's your Monday going?
Now, definitely a much more difficult question than usual. So we hear Hannah saying, hi, Terry, how's your Monday going? So maybe if you're listening at home, you heard her mention Monday. So there's our first reference. We know that today is Monday.
Hi, Hannah. It's going well, thanks. How about yours?
I'm good. I have been working hard on my presentation. I have to do it the day after tomorrow.
Okay, so quite a tricky little question. So today is Monday. Tomorrow is Tuesday. And Hannah has to do her presentation the day after tomorrow, which is Wednesday. So in a way, we actually heard all of those different days mentioned. We did hear the word tomorrow. We did hear Monday. We didn't hear the actual name of the day Wednesday, but we were told it's the day after tomorrow. So quite a tricky question. Like in the IELTS Authentic test, it really is a test of your comprehension skills.
Okay, what's it on?
The impact of climate change in Australia.
That's quite a broad topic, but I also did my presentation on this topic last semester. You're in Professor Mulholland's class, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
So how long do you have to speak for?
Okay, so we hear the keywords how long, right? So how long do you have to speak for? But this is Hannah's answer, right? So Hannah's going to tell Terry how long she has to speak for.
10 minutes. But I'm actually worried that I have too much content and I will go over the time limit.
So again, look very carefully here. How long was Terry's presentation? So don't be confused. The answer is not 10 minutes at this stage, because that is how long Hannah has to speak for.
10 minutes? I had an extra 5 minutes for my presentation.
Okay, now again, quite a tricky question. Hannah's presentation is 10 minutes. Terry just said he had an extra 5 minutes. So obviously 10 plus 5, Terry's presentation was 15 minutes. So another tricky one. Now, we did hear Hannah mention that the broad topic is the impact of climate change in Australia, but we need to find out which of these parts she does not cover, which areas she does not cover.
So what areas are you going to cover?
Okay, so here we go. Terry's just asked Hannah, what areas is she going to cover? So that's why with the predictions, it's so important that we look at the keywords.
I have looked at 4 areas that climate change has impacted on: the coast.
Okay, so we just heard the coast. And remember, we're looking at which area has Hannah not covered. So she has covered the coast. So the answer is not A.
The cities, agriculture, and water resources.
Now, this is quite tricky. You may have seen for answer B, culture, but this is what Hannah said. She said agriculture, right? So agriculture means farming, culture is not agriculture. So we need to get a bit more information here.
Okay, I think you have covered the main areas. You could possibly mention the impact of climate change on human health too.
Actually, I touch on that in some sections.
Now, Terry said she could cover the impact of climate change on human health. And then Hannah said she has touched upon that. Touch upon means you cover it, but not in great depth. But it is covered in her presentation. So A is there, C is there. And that's the tricky one, because we heard the word agriculture, which you may confuse with culture, but they are two different things. Agriculture means farming. So the answer here is B. Now, what I'm expecting is that we're actually going to get a little break and we're going to have a bit more time to predict. So let's listen through.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 24 to 30.
Okay, so as expected, we're going to be dealing with the next 7 questions. And let's skip ahead. And most likely, they're all going to be these no more than 3 words for each answer questions, which is the case. So a very common question type. But one thing about these is we can use some grammar cues or some grammar hints to help us with our answers. So we already know, we have a general idea about what this topic's about. It's about Hannah's presentation on the impact of climate change on Australia. So let's see if we can make some predictions. So we're allowed no more than 3 words for each answer. So 1 word is okay, 2 words, 3 words, maybe even some numbers. So 85% of Australians live of the coast. Now, to me, this seems like the answer is going to be maybe a distance, perhaps. So we might be looking at something like kilometers, perhaps. So, and also, if we're looking at kilometers, then it seems like the preposition is likely to be within, right? So 85% of Australians live within, who knows, maybe 10 kilometers, 20 kilometers of the coast. That seems like a likely answer there. The maps show predictions of the most. Now, following most, we're likely to have an adjective here, a superlative, in fact, right? So if you're not sure what a superlative is, think about big, bigger, biggest, right? So we're going to have a superlative adjective here. So the map shows predictions of the most. And if we're looking at the impact of climate change, it's going to be an adjective related to climate change. So the word vulnerable comes to mind for me. Now, this is definitely a more difficult one when we're having to fill in the gap at the start of the sentence. So gap, more on the threat from heat waves and bushfires in cities. Now, honestly, I'm not too sure what the answer is here either, if you aren't at home. But what I can do is I can look at the keywords to identify, right? So to me, when I listen, I'm going to be listening out for heat waves, bushfires. When I hear those words, or when I expect to hear them, I'm going to be focusing on what that answer could be. Perhaps it's a verb. Talking about verbs, droughts, what we are missing in this sentence is a verb. So droughts of bushfires in cities. So it must be a verb related to droughts. If you're not sure what a drought is, it's when there's a lack of rainfall. So definitely not the easiest section. So what we can see here, though, is that this sentence is an imperative, which means it begins with a verb. It's a command. So talk about how farmers, something heat waves. So obviously farmers don't like heat waves, so I would be thinking something like overcome. But what I also think about is if this is an imperative sentence, one that begins with a verb, perhaps this is also going to be a verb back for question 26. Right, so perhaps these are some hints from Terry to Hannah, perhaps. So I'm always not just thinking about the answers, I'm thinking about the type of conversation that I'm going to hear. Slides, so I'm guessing that Hannah's talking about a PPT or a PowerPoint presentation. Slides show temperature ranges, common farm animals can. Now, I'm not too sure what the answer is, but I know it's a verb. We have the modal can, which is going to be followed by a verb, a base verb, right? So like do, want, need, like this. This section is, now, again, it looks like we're going to have an adjective perhaps, or maybe a participle here, participle verb. So I don't know, the word related, the section is related to agriculture, comes to mind. So definitely not easy to predict the exact answers, but that's what I mean by using the grammar cues to at least put you on the right track. And as we scroll through, we're going to look for those keywords, and hopefully we'll be able to solve the questions, solve the answers.
Now listen and answer questions 24 to 30.
Okay, so as we do go through each one, I just want to remind you what the keywords are that I think are best to listen to. When you have a number, such as 85%, that is usually easy for most people to identify. So I'm really listening carefully. Hopefully I'll hear 85.
That's good. So what are you going to talk about in terms of the impact of climate change on the coast?
The main thing I want to cover is the threat of rising sea levels to the Australian coast. A vital fact that I have learnt is that around 85% of Australians live within 50 kilometres of the coast.
Okay, so we're on the right track there. So 85% of Australians live within, so we need to type in the answers. Now, 50 kilometres. Now, sometimes on the IELTS test, multiple answers will be acceptable. Perhaps 50 kilometres, not plural, might be okay. perhaps it would be okay to spell out the entire word, right? I wouldn't recommend that because there's more chance of misspelling. I think Americans spell it like that. I'm just going to go with the abbreviation within 50 kilometers. So again, if you had a different answer, a different way of spelling that, it may be acceptable in the actual test. But we definitely heard 85% of Australians live within 50 kilometers of the coast. So when we go down to question 25, I would be listening out for maps.
So this is an impact of climate change that will affect many people. I am going to show some maps with predictions of the most vulnerable coastal areas.
Okay, so that one there is an easier question because it's almost word for word what we heard Hannah say. So the maps, so exactly what she said, I'm going to show some maps with predictions of the most vulnerable coastal areas. So there was our superlative most vulnerable coastal areas. For question 26, again, heat waves and bushfires. Hopefully we'll hear those two terms.
I also showed some maps. What about the impact on cities then? Don't you think you will repeat some things from your section on the impact on coastal regions?
I can understand why you might think that, but I'm going to focus more on the threat from heat waves and bushfires in cities.
Now, this is definitely a more difficult question because obviously the answer to fill in the blank comes before the keywords. So you really have to listen the whole time. If you missed that, I'm going to repeat what Hannah said. She said, I can understand why you might think that, but I am going to focus more on the threat from heat waves and bushfires in cities. So even though most of that was word for word, the answer does come before the keywords. So the answer here, well, I'll put it, use the correct punctuation. So focus more on the threat from heat waves and bushfires in cities. Whereas this one might be easier. Hopefully we're going to hear the keyword droughts before we find the answer for the missing words.
I mean, we had a power blackout last summer on some of those really hot days, and bushfires have always been a threat. But I was going to talk about how prolonged droughts increase the risk.
Now, this is one which has been paraphrased. So I'll repeat back for you. So in this whole answer, so Terry gave Hannah a suggestion. Terry said, don't you think you will repeat some of the things from your section on the impact on coastal regions? And here we have Hannah saying, I can understand why you might think that, but I'm going to focus more on the threat from heat waves and bushfires in cities. So we know at the moment she's talking about heat waves and bushfires. I mean, we had a power blackout. We had power blackouts last summer on some of those really hot days, and bushfires have always been a threat. But I was going to talk about how prolonged droughts increase the risk. Now, that is our answer, increase the risk. What we didn't hear Hannah say is droughts increase the risk of bushfires in cities. That reference to bushfires had already been made before, so that can be a little confusing. So just like on test day, you're not going to get the words, you're not going to get what's spoken word for word on your question paper. Often it's rephrased or reordered like here. So droughts increase the risk of bushfires in cities. Okay, and again, because we've already heard the mention of heat waves, I would be focusing on farmers perhaps as the key word to listen to.
Okay, I understand now. You could possibly make some recommendations for how authorities should best prepare for these threats too.
That's a good idea. If I am concise enough, I could look at a case study from a recent bushfire.
You could, but you might not have enough time. What were you going to cover in your next section?
The impact of climate change on Australian agriculture.
Okay. As I mentioned before, agriculture means farming. So hopefully as you listen as well, you'll realize that we're going to get closer to the answer now, because hopefully Hannah's going to tell us about agriculture and we'll hear something about farmers.
I am sure you will talk about droughts in that section too.
Most definitely. That's one of my main points. But I'm also going to mention the effect that heat waves have on livestock.
Okay, so we hear here, Hannah says, I'm also going to mention the effect that heat waves have on livestock. Livestock means the animals that farmers keep on their farms. We didn't actually hear the answer there, right? So talk about how farmers, so let's find out. We're looking for a verb here, right? So
Yes, I think you have to mention that.
Yes. And I am going to talk about how farmers are dealing with heat waves.
okay, so some blended speech here. If you didn't quite catch that, what Hannah said, are dealing with, right? So yes, and I'm also going to talk about how farmers are dealing with heat waves. So I slowed that down so you can hear each word individually, but this is also part of the test. Sometimes you're going to hear the speakers linking some of the words together, which I know can be difficult, but in this test, some questions are easier than others. So if you do have that linked speech, and if that's difficult for you, just realize that's probably one of the harder questions that you're going to have to deal with yourself. So again, slideshows and temperature ranges might be the keywords I'm going to listen for next.
I have some slides which show what sort of temperature ranges common farm animals can handle.
Okay, so this type of question is much easier for most students because we're hearing the words as they're spoken, almost written exactly the same way on the page, whereby Hannah said, I have some slides which show what sort of temperature ranges common farm animals can handle. All right, so we're on to our last question now.
I was quite shocked to research this. I mean, dairy cattle are comfortable in temperatures ranging from 5 degrees Celsius to 20 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, I read about that too. Farmers have to take some extreme measures at times to keep their livestock alive.
Yes, and I think this section flows well into my final section.
Water resources?
Yes, I am definitely going to look at a case study for this.
Now, you might be thinking that, oh, now she's talking about water resources, but I have not heard the answer to this either. So again, our prediction was this section is related. Now, what I think this section means is water resources, right? So now she's talking about this section, which is water resources. So hopefully we can say water resources, or this section about water resources is related to agriculture, but let's check.
Section.
So did I. I talked about the impact of climate change on the Murray-Darling Basin.
Great minds think alike. That's exactly what I'm going to talk about. I think it is closely linked to agriculture too.
Okay, so it wasn't related. She used a different expression, which was closely linked. Whoops, not linked. Linked. Okay, so at this stage, we'll just let the rest of the listening file play through.
And I have the recommendations here, as Professor Mulholland wants us to include as many recommendations as possible.
Well, it sounds like you have prepared really well. How many people will be in the audience?
Not too many. At first, Professor Mulholland wanted us to do our presentation in front of all students. That would have been pretty scary, but now we only have to do our presentation in our tutorial class.
That's not so bad. I did mine in front of everyone.
Really? How many students were there?
More than 100.
Well, there are only 9 students in my tutorial class, so I guess I'm lucky.
That is the end of section 3.
Now, my recommendation would always be to listen carefully until the last word of any particular section. But if you really feel confident, and in this case, we could be quite confident that the answer here was closely linked, what you could do is start reading ahead for section 4 and making some predictions there. So you saw me make a lot of predictions, and as I've said for every one of these webinars related to the listening test, making good predictions is really the key for being successful in the IELTS listening test. Let's check my answers. So we're going to go through to finish, and they've all turned green, so we were lucky there. They were all right. Okay, I want to take you back to the digital whiteboard and let you know what's coming up. So, okay, I'm going to clear this and just, which is hard to believe, Thursday, July the 2nd, the final part of the listening test, and it's going to go more in depth with a similar topic to what was covered in part 2. So I hope wherever you're watching that you're well and you're safe, and at any stage please send through questions via the Grade site or via the Grade Facebook page as well. Take care.